anytime we get triggered or angered, that is a sign or a place that is covering a wound. And so we need to sort of bring that to the light and process our feelings to resolution so that we no longer carry them.
Welcome to The One You Feed.
If you've listened for a while, you know I've talked about my recovery, how a 12-step program saved my life, but also how I don't go anymore. And every time I hear, so you're anti-12-step? I'm not. But when it comes to recovery, nuance tends to get lost. And that's why I was excited to talk with Arlina Allen, author of the 12-Step Guide for Skeptics. She breaks down the misconceptions that keep people from giving these programs a real shot and how to make them work, even if parts of them don't resonate for you. We dig into the language of 12-step programs, terms like character defects, and how they can be reframed. We explore navigating the spiritual aspects even if you don't believe in a traditional higher power. So if you've ever wrestled with recovery, been interested in 12 steps, or wondered if a 12-step program could work for you, this episode is worth your time. I'm Eric Zimmer, and it's time to feed our good wolves. Hi, Arlina. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have you on. Your book is called The 12-Step Guide for Skeptics, Clearing Up Common Misconceptions of a Path to Sobriety. And often on the show, I mention that I was in a 12-step program. I mentioned that I have some concerns about 12-step programs. I mentioned that I don't go to meetings anymore. And the problem is there's a lot of nuance that's missed in that. And so from my side, I'm excited to have a chance to really explore all that nuance so that people who are listening, A, understand kind of my perspective on that, but also more importantly, because this is your interview, they understand the perspective that you're providing, that I think you did a great job. Because this idea that you say at some point, right, I wish that, that people, if they had some boundaries, some context, a shift in perspective, they could move past some of these common barriers and get a lot out of 12-step programs. Yeah. And I think that's really important because despite there being lots of other things on offer these days, there is nothing that has the reach and is free that 12-step programs do. They're amazing. It's amazing that they exist.
Yeah, really.
And there are common barriers and misperceptions that I think keep a lot of people out or drive people out after a while. And I think your book does a really nice job of dealing with those. So I think you really accomplished your mission.
That means a lot to me, knowing who you are and all of your knowledge. So thank you for saying that. That was the mission.
So we're going to get to that book in a second, but we will start like we always do with the parable. And in the parable, there's a grandparent who's talking with their grandchild. And they say, in life, there are two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One is the good wolf, which represents things like kindness and bravery and love. And the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear. And the grandchild stops. They think about it for a second. They look up at their grandparent and they say, well, which one wins? And the grandparent says, the one you feed. So I'd like to start off by asking you what that parable means to you in your life and in the work that you do.
I love that parable. And I have thought about this a lot. And you're going to ask a question, and not to be reductionist about it. What is so powerful about it is sort of this idea that energy flows where attention goes. Like, whatever we focus on expands, right? But if we sort of twist it a little bit and say that, it's not which one you feed, but what do you feed it, right? Like, I know you're very aware of like internal family systems. And I would say over the last 4 or 5 years, since I learned about internal family systems, which is a way to relate to all the parts inside of you, including what we would call like the bad parts, is that all of our parts have a positive intention, and sometimes they do it in destructive ways. And, I had a mentor early on who asked me if, we would talk a lot about self-compassion, and she would ask me, can you love your unlovable parts? And I thought it was an impossible question, because oftentimes the answer is no, I don't. I had that experience that I wanted to cut parts of me out.
Yeah.
There are parts of me I wanted to kill, but that's not really possible, right? And there's this old saying, you can't hate yourself well. And so when she posed that question to me, can you love your unlovable parts? And it was no, but then I was introduced to internal family systems. I began to understand that what I would call like the bad wolf, or the bad parts, the greed, the hatred, all that stuff, there was a positive intention for those roles in my life. And as I fed them love and compassion and understanding and appreciation, and recognizing that I was behaving in those ways out of survival skills, that sort of lowered the tension in my body. It helped
Yeah.
me to release fear and come more from a place of love, which is what I think we would commonly call the good wolf. And so by loving, like, the approach to getting rid of the good wolf is to actually love it.
That leads us right into, I think, something we can talk about with 12-step programs, because there's a lot of nuance in this, right? And 12-step programs, I think one of the things that you say right out of the gate, and you say again and again and again, and I just want to get it out there for everything else that's about to follow, is that people are not the program.
Thank you.
Right? People are not the program.
Yes.
And so as I talk about things that challenge me in 12-step meetings, you're going to hear me talk about people from time to time, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that everybody understand that. Like, people are not the program. You can go to different meetings and get different experiences.
Yeah.
You can just ignore the one person that says stuff that you don't like. Like, there's lots of ways to work with that. All right, now back to where we were, which is that you're talking about loving all these parts of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the the 12-step literature, as we go into it, but the 12-step literature is largely based originally on the original text, which was AA's big book.
Mm-hmm. Alcoholics Anonymous. Tends
to be fairly strong in its language about selfishness is our problem.
Yeah.
We have these character defects that we have to get rid of,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's not a whole lot there necessarily at first glance about loving these parts of us that are problematic, right? I often would hear people say, I was a liar. I'm still a liar, cheat, and a thief, and that's not said in a I'm proud of it way. There's some part of me that's bad. And I need to use this program to get rid of it. So let's just start talking there as a thing that I do know that rubs some people wrong about 12-step language, is that idea. They don't want to talk about character defects. They may feel terrible about themselves already. Yeah. So let's help reframe that or give that some context.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter, listen, that book was written in 1935, right? They didn't have, we're sort of judging their content of information based on the information that we have today. So we can see the stark contrast in, these ideologies. And so I think first off, I just want to say that that's actually very valid. It's very valid to just be like, hey, there is a lot of this language in there that is sort of reinforcing shame as opposed to resolving it. Like this idea of character defects. I don't actually like that word myself. I will tell people to go back to literature all the time, and I do have my own opinions. And one of my opinions is that I like to think of character defects as survival skills, right? Like the character defects really imply that they're, like, if you do read the literature, they do talk about how these are natural instincts that are out of balance. So while there is talk about character defects, there is also sort of compassionate language around, hey, this is a natural instinct and it was just out of balance. But we do have this negativity bias where we do sort of focus on the negative and discard the positive. And so both things are in it. It just depends on what you focus on, like the good wolf and the bad wolf. But both are actually valid. And I am very sensitive to people who are vulnerable, and they go to this program feeling guilt and shame, and to be confronted with that is very challenging on so many levels. And I think, like, when someone kind of hits bottom and they're just like, okay, like, there are some things that are not working, I'm willing to surrender and receive information like, you're actually doing some stuff that's wrong, just flat out
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
And so, but it is a little harsh. There is a lot of focus on character defects because those are the things that need corrected. We don't need to correct the good things already. So it's like, hey, let's talk about the problems. Let's bring some solutions, and so that you can feel better.
Right. And I think the modern insight that underlies this, which it isn't in the book, and we could debate whether the book should be updated or not, but is that yes, character defects and yes, our selfishness are actually really problems, and they are part of the reason that we are stuck in the mess that we are in.
Yeah.
The more modern insight is those things exist for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are serving some sort of purpose. And again, that purpose it's not working anymore,
Right.
but it made sense. And so it moves from, as Gabor Mate famously said, right? You don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain.
Exactly.
But I do think for me that idea of particularly the lines about, selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of our problem,
Mm-hmm.
those changed my life. It's strong medicine. It is strong medicine.
Yeah.
But for me, it was, right? Because of what I realized was whether I was thinking good about myself or thinking bad about myself, what I was doing was always thinking about just myself.
Yeah, we do show up I showed up pretty broken,
Yep.
self-centered to the extreme, self-seeking to the extreme. But why was I seeking so hard?
Yep.
I had needs that were not being met. And all my survival skills that I had developed in childhood were not transferable to healthy adult life. And so, I was met with that strong medicine, but I was just at that point where I was like, my way is not working, and I'm
Yeah.
ready. It was like, I was in such a state of humility that I was like, okay, tell me how you did this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was
Yep.
willing to take, and so, and let's not get it twisted. People typically go there because their lives are going, it's not just that they're not going well, they're going bad, like really. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
although
Yeah.
there is a lot of conversation now with like dry January stuff, like people are recognizing that living an alcohol free is about optimization. It's not necessarily because you have a problem, but most people go there because life is terrible. And that's where I was. I was in so much emotional pain. I was like, do I kill myself or do I get sober? And it was something I had to deliberate. I was like,
Right. Right. And I think that the couple of things that make a lot of this difficult in a way are that indeed addiction issues, alcohol use disorder ranges on a vast spectrum.
It's a spectrum.
One person's quote unquote bottom is very different than what another person's is.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good thing on the whole that there are alternatives to 12-step programs, because I think even with even when we get past some of the misconceptions that you're talking about, they're not for everybody. So I think it's good that there's other things out there. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of glad for me that there wasn't.
Me too.
Right? Because I was dying. I was going to go to jail for a really long time. And I'm glad I didn't spend any more time than I already had messing around with apps or this or that. Like, I just went, and it was the only thing that there was.
Same.
And it was a little bit intense, and it wasn't, it wasn't always but it worked. It saved my life. They saved my life twice. And so again, I feel mixed because I think it's really good that there are alternatives. And for some people, an app will stop their drinking in an optimization type way. Yeah. That would not have worked for me at that point, right? I needed something far more than that.
Yeah, I think we got sober the same year, and I'm also very grateful that there wasn't anything else available. Like, there was no recovery memoirs. There were no,
Nope.
There is sober social media accounts, which is kind of one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because there's a lot of people that
Hmm.
are backlashing, like openly bashing 12 step. But,
Yep.
I'm not one of those that it's this or and only this. Like, I'm an and girl. I'm like, 12 step, the hill I will die on is the 12 steps are a worthy endeavor. I'm not saying it's the only thing that you should do. I'm just saying that there are amazing benefits to it, largely for free. And that it's just a worthy endeavor. I'm an and girl, so I'm like 12 steps and therapy. I'm yoga and 12 there's just so many different modalities. There's so many this is such a great time to get sober or to get go alcohol free if that's kind of your
Hmm.
thing for
Yep.
optimization. But I'm just saying in this book that the 12 steps are a worthy endeavor. Here, I just wanted to meet some of the roadblocks head on, which I think are actually very valid, and just be like, here's a way to round that so that you
Yeah.
get the benefit, because the benefits are so good. Like you said, it saved your life. Me too. But it not only saved my life, like it gave me sort of a very practical and pragmatic way for problem resolution, for self-examination, for goal achievement.
I love that idea, and let's address some of these barriers up front,
Okay.
right? I think there are two types of barriers, right? Barrier one is, do I really need to get sober? Barrier two is, do I need to do it in this way in this program? So I want to talk about category one just for a second.
Mhm.
And I think the first one there, and you talk about this, is, can't I just learn to moderate?
Well, listen, there we have in society, it's like alcohol is the only drug you have to explain why you're not using it. There is just we are just so bombarded with messages of, drinking, it's fun and all that stuff. So there's a lot of external influence to drink, right? And so it's very hard to come to and listen, like for me, it was a reliable source of medicine. It was medicine for me, to be honest. It was my way of emotion management, but that ultimately did not work well for me because when I ingest alcohol, there's like this switch that gets flipped, and all I want is more.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
listen, yeah. So I did try to moderate for 2 years after a particularly bad night involving the police. I didn't end up going to jail, partly because I was dating this policeman.
Good strategy, perhaps, if
Lord have
you're
mercy.
going to get in trouble with the law often.
Yeah, yeah.
I never contemplated that one till now. I never
Damn it,
once
missed
thought.
opportunity here.
Totally. Imagine I could
Yeah.
have run this thing out a few more years at least,
Damn it. Jeez, yeah. But I had a really bad night and I woke up the next morning. It really hurt my sister and physically and emotionally and super traumatized. And I woke up with that horrible, sickening, sinking feeling that something terrible had happened the night before. And I had to hear things secondhand because I was a blackout drinker.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's when I started asking the questions like, am I an alcoholic? Like, what makes me different from all my friends who drink like I do? And it just like one question led to another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, you know what? Let me just try to moderate this thing. Let me just try to learn how to control it and drink like a lady. Because I was drinking like a trucker. I was not drinking like a lady. Drinking like a sailor. Lord have mercy. So I was like, let me try to control this thing. And so I spent the next 2 years in the self-help section of Barnes and Noble, like trying to figure out what was my problem really. And I thought it can't be this. Truth is I was kind of on the right track, but 30 years ago, I was reading books like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success or Money or Abundance. I forgot what it was, a Deepak Chopra book. But I was trying to think my way into right living kind of a thing.
Yep.
And I was trying to moderate. So it was like a glass of water between drinks. It was eating before I went out. It was blah, blah, blah. Keep a couple of aspirin and a glass of water by my nightstand. Because when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with cotton mouth, you're just like, completely dehydrated from the alcohol. I thought, oh yeah, if I could, prevent the hangover, maybe that was the thing. Vitamins, whatever. But so I didn't have a horrible night every night I drank. But when I had a horrible night, it was because I was drinking. And I really just could not moderate. I couldn't predict what would happen once I started drinking, even with all these crazy plans I had in place. And I kind of joke around that I had two alter egos when I was drinking. I had Badass Bency or Wimpy Wendy, because I was either fighting or crying when I was drinking.
There's a third.
Slutty Susan. And literally everybody loved her.
Yeah.
I like to joke around that if I could encapsulate my drinking experience, is that if it was in a bottle, a bag, or blue jeans, I was doing it.
That's good.
Anything
That's
to fill a
good.
void, literally and figuratively. Super fun.
That's good.
Yeah, good times.
Yeah, moderation's an interesting one. There's a line from the AA Big Book that is like seared itself into my brain, which was, and I may not get it exact because I'm a little bit away from it, but the thought that somehow, some way they'll control their drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker.
Control and enjoy.
Oh, that's right. Yes. And so control and enjoy their drinking. And because I was trying to control and enjoy it from very early on.
Same.
I knew like this, hang on, like something in me was like, this something's off. But I tried moderation too.
Yeah.
And this was the first time that I got sober. I was a homeless heroin addict. You know, it was no doubt in anyone's mind, including mine. I had 50 years of jail time. I mean, there was just no doubt this isn't working.
Yeah.
I stayed sober about 8 years. I went back out. And all I did when I went back out was drink and smoke an enormous amount of marijuana. Over time, it began to dawn on me, this isn't going so well. Now, I wasn't having external consequences. Everything on the outside was okay. I had the best job I'd ever had. I was getting promoted. But inside I knew I was really sick. But I also knew that like, I'm going to have to be abstinent and go back to recovery. God, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So maybe I can moderate. And I thought to myself, there's a program called moderation management out there. I'm going to try this. And I was moderation management's best student for a while. Or what I should say is I was its most ardent student at trying and still got an F. But I remember nights like this where it's like 11:30 at night. I got to get up at 6:30 in the morning. I'm already fairly hammered at this point. And I'm standing by the sink and my brain is fighting me. I'm fighting my brain. It's like one more shot. And of course I'm going, there's no reasonable reason to have one more shot. You're already 3 or 4 shots over what moderation looks like. And yet, I mean, I lost that battle more often than I won it. And I had that realization that you just talked about, control and enjoy. I realized I can try and control my drinking, not very well, but it's miserable. It's miserable because I'm having the 11:30 at night battle over a shot of whiskey that's tearing me apart inside. Or I can just let off the reins and enjoy it. Except that at this point for me, right, there's a little bit of enjoyment and a whole lot of trouble. But I just remember, and I'm really glad that I tried moderation management, like really tried it. Because it just, now when my brain starts that dance up again, I'm like, nope, you tried. Yeah. Doesn't work. Not for you.
You had enough evidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's such important information to have. Like, yeah. I love this idea of run the experiment. And we ran the experiment. We ran the moderation experiment and we gave it the old college try. An experiment, I love the lens of science because it has a way of depersonalizing things. So like shame and guilt are not involved. But it's like, let's just run the experiment. And I ran the experiment and I tried and tried and tried. And I fancy myself a clever girl. It's like, okay, but an experiment is you have a presupposition. And you run the experiment, you take some actions, right? You have some beliefs, make some decisions, you take some actions, and then you examine the results, right? And my results were coming out pretty clear that
Yep.
I am just not that person who can moderate. There are
Yep.
some people who can.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
in all transparency, there are some people who can do that. Like you said in the beginning, addiction or alcohol use disorder is a spectrum. So there will be people somewhere along the line who can choose to stop and it's not a thing. Or maybe they can choose to moderate and they want to. For me, it just took up too much mental bandwidth because I had this element of obsession that maybe
Hmm.
some people don't
Yes.
have. And so once I start drinking, it's that switch that gets flipped that says more. And I don't have any ability to moderate that. So going through this process of trying to moderate, I would argue is essential.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to give up something that
It's
you
working.
love without a
Love,
really good reason, right?
love, love.
Yeah. And so I agree. I think the moderation is a useful experiment. And I love the lens of experiment too. And I tried that experiment. That's how I went back out after 8 years, was this belief like, well, I'm just not going to do heroin. Obviously, that's a terrible idea. We all know that. And, so I'm just going to drink and the experiment, it's sort of like when they test, the effectiveness of a drug. In the first month, you're like, hey, this drug's pretty effective. And then they realize that after 3 years, it'll kill you. That was kind of my experiment. And that's not an experiment that I want to run again because experiments can be expensive,
Ooh, yeah.
and deadly,
And
these type of experiments. And so I ran it once, it didn't work. And I remain fairly clear that I can't do that. So, okay, moderation, this idea, you go through it, you figure it out. And let's say we now arrive at a point where I'm like, okay, it seems pretty clear that there's no moderation for me, right? I'm either on and maybe I'm off, but I don't have that slow down switch
the
or
cost
that
is
middle.
just too high.
Yep. Yep. So now I need help. And I want to, I'm looking around at help and I see 12-step programs and I go, ugh.
Isn't
Right?
that funny that that's like the common response to 12 is like, oh God, like,
Well, I think honestly, for nearly anybody who is facing down getting sober, it could be anything. And they would be like, ugh, too. Anything that asks much out of them, right? But 12-step programs, people know more about them than they do any other alternative because of the media and all these different things, right? We have an idea of what that means. Whereas if I said, you should go to Smart Recovery, people would be like, okay, what the heck is that? No one has any idea because, it's a small thing. So one of the things that you say is, I almost missed out on my sobriety because the program isn't what I thought it was going to be. A sad, shameful group of dingy church basement dwellers.
that's what I thought it was.
Well, some meetings are kind of that way, to be honest. There's a
Yeah.
few.
To be honest, you know what? I've grown to love those too.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah,
But,
because the essence is that it wasn't what I thought it was. And it's so interesting. I coach people who want to get sober who don't want to do that. And I will always ask why. Or even the people that I interview, I always ask why not? And it's always like, so there are three big trigger words that typically keep people out. If you look at the steps at face value, like when I read them, like I wrote this book because I'm a skeptic. Like I saw the steps and I saw God, I saw alcoholic, and I saw powerless. And I was like, no, thank you.
yeah.
But then my way wasn't working and there was nothing else. I was like, fine, I'll go.
Yeah.
But, and I met this girl, I talk about her in the book a lot, Kimmers. I was like, listen, if this is religious, I'm not going to be able to do, if this is the God thing, like, I'm not going to be able to do this because I grew up in the church and I felt like I had been begged God my whole life to fix me. And here we are, still human, right? I was still making all these mistakes. I was still acting in ways that were not in alignment with the values that I grew up with. And so I thought I was a bad person. So I kept asking God to fix me. And I got to this point where I was like, you know what? If I can't be good, I kept failing. I thought I was failing. And so I decided if I couldn't be good, I was going to be good at being bad. So it's like, and so
I relate.
when I got sober and there's all this talk about God, I was like, if that's what this is, I'm not going to be able to do it. And this girl pulled me aside and she was like, hey, It's not a thing. Don't worry about it. She's like, just for funsies, let's do this little exercise. She said, take a piece of paper out on one side, write down all the attributes that you would want God to be. And it was like, okay, well, it's like loving, powerful. I'm clearly the favorite. All these positive, but it had to make sense to me. Like, what did I really know about God? Because I grew up with God, and there were times when I had spiritual experiences, and so I was trying to draw from like all the positive things I had felt growing up. And she's like, well, what don't you want it to be? And I was like, well, punishing, this idea of hell. What is that all about? How can you say that you love me, but then condemn me to hell? Like I'm born on the wrong side of the planet, and they have a different religion or whatever. And she was like, okay. So when I was done, she said, hand me your piece of paper. And I handed it to her, and she tore it in half. And she handed me back the positive side. She's like, let's just start with this. I was like, that's it. And she's like, that's it. I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know that so it was introduced to this idea that you could redefine words. Like, who gets to decide what God means to you? You do.
Right.
Like, I have like this rebellious nature. I was like, nobody's going to tell me what God means to me. I'm going to decide. Yeah. But I just didn't know that was an option until she told me it was an option. That was revolutionary to me.
So listener, consider this your halfway through the episode integration reminder. Remember, knowledge is power, but only if combined with action and integration. It can be transformative to take a minute to synthesize information rather than just ingesting it in a detached way. So let's collectively take a moment to pause and reflect. What's your one big insight so far, and how can you put it into practice in your life? Seriously, just take a second, pause the audio, and reflect. It can be so powerful to have these reminders to stop and be present, can't it? If you want to keep this momentum going that you built with this little exercise, I'd encourage you to get on our Good Wolf Reminders SMS list. I'll shoot you 2 texts a week with insightful little prompts and wisdom from podcast guests. They're a nice little nudge to stop and be present in your life. And they're a helpful way to not get lost in the busyness and forget what is important. You can join at oneyoufeed.net/SMS, and if you don't like them, you can get off the list really easily. So far, there are over 1,172 others from the One You Feed community on the list, and we'd love to welcome you as well. So head on over to oneyoufeed.net/SMS, and let's feed our good wolves together. Yeah, I think that line that they as a last second decision tacked on to the end of the third step after a whole lot of debate about it. God, as we understood him. And now it still says him, but at least it gave this little wiggle room there, right? Mm-hmm. And I bet that line saved millions of people's lives.
Yeah.
My problem was different around God. My problem was I came in and I didn't believe in God. And so I came in and I was told you need to have a higher power and it needs to you can make it whatever you want, but it's 1994 in Columbus, Ohio, and this is what 95% of us are talking about when we say God. We may drop the judging, shameful pieces, but we still believe it's this thing that's going to intervene on your behalf and get you sober. And I was so desperate. I was like, okay, fine. Okay, I'm in. I'll do whatever it takes. And I tried to believe. Mm. And then something really bad happened in my life. And I realized that I didn't have a God that made any sense to me.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of the unraveling. It still took me a few years, but eventually I went back out. So when I came back, I was like, all right, I can't pretend again. What do I do with God? Because I don't believe in an interventionist God that does anything. I don't believe in a person. That's me, right? And what I realized was I can't build my life on something I don't personally believe. That's a bad strategy.
Yeah.
And so then for me, it became, I need to do an even more radical re-understanding of what this means.
Yeah.
And so my problem was slightly different, but it is doable, right? It is doable. There, as you mentioned in the book, some people just have God be an acronym for group of drunks, meaning I believe the people in the program, the support of that can help me get sober. And I think that's a really good one. Some people say good orderly direction. right? That's another one. For me, it ended up being I believe that there are these sort of principles that we see again and again across religious traditions, across philosophical traditions, across psychological traditions. And my belief became, if I try to live according to those principles to the best of my ability, it'll be enough to keep me sober, and it'll be enough for me to handle what happens. And that turned out to be a foundation that I could build on. I will say that over time, because I don't go to 12-step meetings anymore, and we'll eventually get to what that is, over time I got tired of translating in my head. I got tired of hearing somebody talk about God and me go, okay, well, what that actually means to me, because a lot of the ways it was talked about was in the interventionist sense. And that didn't make sense to me. So not only was I translating the word, I had to try and translate the sentiment. And just for me over time, it grew tiring.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
It seems like and the truth of the matter is, it's for a lot of people, it's a great place to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we can, I love this idea of layering tools.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So let's just say, for argument's sake, the book Alcoholics Anonymous talks about, gaining access to power. Like that really, if we kind of boil it all down, that's what it's about, access to power. And you and I together is stronger than me by myself. There's this idea that you can't read the label from inside the jar. And when I'm in the swirling emotions of despair and all that stuff, I'm in the jar and I can't see. But if you said, hey, Arlina, just share with me what you're thinking, and I talk about it, there's something about talking about it that relieves some sort of stress. There's a connection that happens. There's some validation. You feel like, yeah, I could see how you'd feel that way. Like, to me, those are like the magic words. I could see how you'd feel that way.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
validating, right? And there's something that then makes me feel safe. And then my defenses come down, and then the truth comes out, right? And so, like, let's just say that it's a good place to start, because we get to have those are the types of dynamics, and that is a power greater than myself. Like, just at bare minimum, that in and of itself to me was enough. And I really struggled with making sense of God until Kim Ayers was like, just focus on these things and just forget everything. It's the mental gymnastics required to try to figure it out sometimes is just too much, right? But we focus on what we do want, not what we don't want, right? And so I have had this ability to sort of like let go of the rest.
Yep. And we'll come back around probably to, your book talks about why people don't go to AA and then why people leave. And so I think we're going to come back around to leave, although I keep sort of jumping in because we're in the right spot. But what are you said 3 big reasons that people kind of resist? I think we talked about God. The other was the word alcoholic. Talk to me about that one.
Yeah, resistance is huge. Put a pin in that. I want to circle back to that. But the word alcoholic typically brings up these ideas of a man in a trench coat, homeless people. It typically serves up really negative images. But I started going to meetings and meeting these amazing people. I'm from, California, the Silicon Valley area, and I was exposed to a lot of like professionals. Like, don't get it. There was like, homeless people too. But I and this is one of those things, like, I found the right meetings that served me. And I went to like the bougie side of town and hung out with the fancy people who were sober. And I wanted to be like them, because they were saying things that resonated with me. And they say that you're kind of the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So I decided to hang out with people who were like account executives or doctors, lawyers, like, I related to them better, and they had what I wanted. So, I did a lot of that. I totally forgot what your question was.
We were talking about the word alcoholic.
Oh, thank you. I get so excited about this stuff. But I was like, if that's what an alcoholic is, sign me up. Like, I wanted what these people had. And so really what I've come to understand, that when people use that word freely, it's because these are people who have stood at the abyss of despair, of life and death. And even though they had tremendous guilt and shame, they decided to do self-examination, which requires a huge amount of courage. Like, these people are badass. Like, they are able to practice, they're really striving for things like honesty and integrity. Like, you're talking about the principles. Like, I have a friend who's a staunch atheist. He's been going to AA for 40 years. And he just decided that he was going to listen for the principles and do that. And I was like, same. Because even though, I started to have this relationship with this higher power thing that I don't really understand. I kind of think of it as love. Like, we're both still talking about the same thing in practicality. And so even this, people rail at the word alcoholic at first, it's because they're missing some information. That's a limiting belief.
Yeah.
A limiting belief is either missing information or incorrect information. And so I would sort of argue that if you are like throwing, AA out, it's because you're harboring a limiting belief. And I'm what you would call recovery promiscuous. I want all the tools that are going to benefit my life. So I don't see the word alcoholic as a shame label. I see it as a badge of honor.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've explored this topic a lot on the show, and it's this idea of labels and diagnoses when it comes to addiction, mental health, all of this stuff, right? And I think that ultimately what we want is we want to be able to use labels when they are useful to us and discard them when they're not. And to your point, know what that label actually really means, or at least means to me. I'm 17 years sober. I don't go to 12-step programs, but if you ask me, are you an alcoholic? I would say yes. But that only means one thing to me today. It means that I'm someone who cannot successfully drink alcohol. That's the extent of it. It doesn't mean anything about that I'm still sick. It doesn't mean that I have character defects. It doesn't mean that I'm different than other people, except in one way, right? To me, because I don't feel like I'm different than the average person, right? I don't feel like there's like people in recovery and then normal people. Like I think that's a useful distinction for a while. And then eventually for me became unuseful. And so for me, it's just that one thing. I cannot successfully take mind altering substances, And so, I love what you said about a limiting belief, right? Being either, incorrect information, or was it not enough information, or missing information? Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, it's just interesting because because this program has allowed me to grow and evolve. What I need also changes.
Yep.
Right. And I went to meetings for so long because it was sort of just a convenient way for me to check a lot of boxes.
Yeah, and it is.
Yeah.
I mean that in a good way.
Yeah.
When I stepped away, I had to reverse engineer in my mind, what do I think I'm getting there?
Yeah.
Why is this working?
Yeah.
And now I got to make sure that I'm getting those things elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that does take some patching together, whereas AA, like you said, is a very convenient, one-stop shop for a lot of good things.
A lot of good things. Yeah. Yeah, this is where I'm an and girl. Like, I still do 12-step meetings occasionally, but I moved 5 years ago, and so I quit going to in-person meetings because in the area that I'm in, it just wasn't feeding me anymore.
Yep.
And so I decided I needed to layer in more things.
Yeah.
So.
And I should be clear, I will go to a 12-step meeting. I mean, like, my friend Chris is fairly active in the program. I'll go with him. Occasionally I will go just because, on one level, I love them. Mm. I do think there is a type of beauty that you see in a 12-step meeting that you don't see most of the time anywhere else. And it's there in pretty much every meeting if you look for it. And so I am not against AA or 12-step programs in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not I won't go. They just, for me, in the last X number of years, didn't feel like the best way for me to become the next best version of myself.
Yeah, I think that it leads to a really good point, is that we need to really trust our instincts. Like everything you said is so valid, right? It's like we get the whole point is that we're growing and evolving. And so we need different things. And it's not that I don't like 12-step meetings. It's that I have a craving for to go deeper or for more.
Yeah.
And so I started
Yeah.
exploring other things.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, sometimes it's just easier to, jump on a Zoom meeting and see some friends and hear some good stories, be reminded of information that
Yeah.
that transformed my life. They say that we have a quick forgetter, but I like to, something you were talking about sort of made me think of what neuroscience calls the default mode network. It's sort of like the way that it's like the neurology, and I love science because when I don't have faith, I have science. And science is actually explaining a lot of this spiritual dynamics that you and I understand now, right? And so, what I know now is that our brain operates on a default mode network. It's the way our neurology was developed. There's this really good book called What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. And it's a slight variation on the question of what's wrong with you. Right. And it's such a more gentle, compassionate, but it's like, what happened to you? Well, what happened to me is that I had a lot of trauma when I was growing up, and it shaped my neurology. It shaped how I respond to stress in a very specific way. And so in my adulthood, I have learned tools and practices that reshape that default. But what I know for sure is that if I stop doing all these practices, I will revert back to my default, which is basically at the essence, to be super reductionist, it's fear-based, right? Like I come back to my survival skills, which no longer serve me in adulthood. And so I just feel like it's a more compassionate lens instead of thinking that I'm an addict or I'm an alcoholic. Like that's really not something that's in, like, I don't really talk about that a whole lot anymore. I've been sober for 30 years. It's been a long time since I
Right.
struggled
Right.
with all that stuff. I do struggle with when my fear gets kicked up, I do respond in very specific ways. And so I sort of liken it to, diet and exercise. Like I could go to the gym every day for a year and be in great shape, but if I stop, I revert back.
Yep.
I lose all
Yep.
my gains, which is very painful. Or like I wouldn't eat one salad and expect to be healthy the rest of my life. So it's like these.
Right.
So everybody kind
Totally.
of gets
Yeah.
that. So that's why, going to meetings, like I stated in the book, it's like, I'm not saying that you got to go to meetings forever. Like you're a beautiful example of you don't have to do that. And there will be people who say you have to go to meetings for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you'll relapse and die, which is
Yep.
what we see actually. I'm sure you have too. They told me when I first got sober that if you stick around long enough, you'll see people die.
Yeah.
And that has definitely been my experience. I've, lost people I really loved to this,
Yep.
this thing, whatever you want to call it. So I think, when we're talking about the people being problematic, let's just have a little compassion for them because they're afraid. They've seen some terrible and experienced some terrible things. But
Yep.
no, you're right. You don't have to do this forever. For me, it was just like a convenient place to check all the boxes of gratitude and remember what it was like and have
Mm-hmm.
hope for the future and be of service and connect with spirituality. Because,
Yep.
in my everyday walking around life, I really don't have a lot of opportunities to talk about spirituality unless I'm in those rooms where, it's encouraged to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I didn't do this show,
Yeah.
I would probably still go to 12-step meetings. Like if a huge chunk of my life was devoted to doing something different with my mind, let's say I was still in the software business, which was a great career in many ways. It's just simply that, to your point, like I need to be reminded of things very often. I just happen to be in a position where I get reminded of these things all the time because I'm talking to people all the time. I'm reading these books all the time, and I'm helping teach these ideas to other people all the time that I swim in them.
Yeah.
And that's beneficial, but I may not always do that, right? I mean, maybe I go back to be a software guy in 5 years. I don't know.
Please don't ever do that.
And my needs might change. And so I want to go back to something you said a second ago about trusting our instincts, because I think this is interesting because today I can trust my instincts. When I was still drinking or very early in sobriety, my instincts were terrible. Like at least what my natural reaction to do was always, like, by that point, generally a really bad idea. There's that line that I don't know if they still say it, but they used to say it all the time. Like, it's your thinking that got you here. And so, I think that idea of instincts is an interesting one, because I think sometimes we can trust our instincts, but our instinct might be, I shouldn't go to meetings.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you bring up a good point. You and I are pretty far down the road. We've had the ability to learn how to trust our instincts. And I was in the beginning not able to trust my instincts because my instincts were out of balance and my default mode network was still in survival mode. Right. And so I just needed new information and, new ideas to help me think, because when the way I was thinking made sense to me at the time, and it's interesting how, decisions are made. It's like you have a feeling and you consider the information that you have and you make a decision based on the information that you have, and then you take action. You invoke the law of cause and effect and you experience a result. That's a cybernetic loop. So like I found myself in the same spot over and over again. And I was like, what is going on? And what I learned later is that we decide emotionally and justify logically. And what I was deciding from emotionally was this, I had this aversion to myself, because I hated who I was. I had so much self-loathing. I kept making these mistakes. I mean, it was a really terrible, but I just didn't know what to do instead. Right. And by going to meetings, by actually working the 12 steps with a sponsor,
Yes.
a loving, compassionate, there's a whole discussion around how do you choose one and what do you actually do? I actually described in the book how I did it. It's not the right way. It's just a way. It worked for me, whatever. But yeah, it was a process that just, ended up helping me get the result I wanted. But it did start with this examining my whole decision-making process, like really breaking it down. And the 12 steps, specifically the fourth step, was a very pragmatic and practical way to sort of unpack all my baggage. So helpful.
Yeah, I think let's spend a minute there, because I think that's important. I think one of the aspects of AA, the reason that it works, is the peer support, right?
It's peer support, not professional. But yeah.
I'm talking to you, one alcoholic talking to another. There's some sort of magic in that, right? So there's that. That's a big component of it. The other is that there is a actual program to change who you are. Right? That's what the 12 steps are. Or maybe that's the wrong way to say it. Maybe it's not to change who you are, but it's to help you change the coping mechanisms and the ways that you relate to the world that are causing you to stay, as you said, stuck in the same place. And that's a real benefit. Are the 12 steps the best way to change? I don't know. Is there a best way to change? Of course not. There's lots of ways to change, but it is a way. And it is a way that lots of people have done. And I'm so glad that I did them multiple times, right? I'm so glad that I went through that process multiple times, because they do. And so when I look at my life and I'm like, okay, if I'm not going to meetings, what do I need? One of the things I need is some sort of structured way of continuing to examine my inner world and change. And there's lots of different ones, but that's a component of what I think, like in my sort of reverse engineering, I need the support of other people and I need to support other people. I also need some sort of structure to how I change. And the 12 steps gives that.
Yeah, what I loved about the 4-step, and to be honest, I kept hearing that people were doing steps 1, 2, and 3 and relapsing, and that terrified me. Mm-hmm. And what I get is that people are so afraid to look, that because of the guilt and shame, people are so afraid to look. But what I want people to know is the 4-step is license to bitch. Like you get to
At least at first, at least until your sponsor gets a hold of it.
Well, listen, I had a captive audience. I had a really kind,
All
compassionate
right.
sponsor, and I wish I would have known that before going in. I was like, oh my God, that's just a different perspective. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? You get to talk about, you get to name the people that you're mad at or resentful of. You get to get really specific about the cause and how they hurt you, and how they hurt you. Was it your self-esteem that they damaged? It's all kind of sounding a little victim-y. But it's like, what was affected? It was my self esteem. It was my emotional safety, financial insecurity, relationship. I got to examine, and then the last part was, what was my role in all this? What was the dynamic, right? In every relationship is sort of a 50-50 shared. So what was my part? And that was the light bulb moment. Like, and when I wrote it all out at once, I began to see these patterns emerging in my life. And it was largely around responsibility. I was taking inappropriate responsibility for others and not taking enough responsibility for myself. And when I was able to sort that out, all that out with a sponsor, I was able to let go of what wasn't mine so that I could bear the weight of what was, which was a lot, right?
That's a really beautiful thing
But
to
you
say.
know,
Say that, yeah.
can I just
That's
say this one thing is that it wasn't that I changed, it was I emerged. Like through this process, it's like my authentic self was able to emerge. And so it wasn't like I was bad and needed to be good. It was like I was holding on to these survival skills that were actually hurting me.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
wasn't able to let go of them until I knew what to do instead. Like that's super practical, right?
So, listener, in thinking about all that and the other great wisdom from today's episode, if you were going to isolate just one top insight that you're taking away, what would it be? Not your top 10, not the top 5, just one. What is it? Think about it. Got it? Now I ask you, what's one tiny little thing you can do today to put it in practice? Or maybe just take a baby step towards it. Remember, little by little, a little becomes a lot. Profound change happens as a result of aggregated tiny actions, not massive heroic effort. If you're not already on our Good Wolf Reminder SMS list, I'd highly recommend it as a tool you can leverage to remind you to take those vital baby steps forward. You can get on there at oneyoufeed.net/SMS. It's totally free, and once you're on there, I'll send you a couple text messages a week with little reminders and nudges. Here's one I recently shared to give you an idea of the type of stuff I send. Keep practicing, even if it seems hopeless. Don't strive for perfection, aim for consistency, and no matter what, keep showing up for yourself. That was a great gem from recent guest Light Watkins. And if you're on the fence about joining, remember it's totally free and easy to unsubscribe. If you want to get in, I'd love to have you there. Just go to oneyoufeed.net/SMS. All right, back to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if something is the only way you know how to cope with certain situations in life, you're going to stick with it until you have something else that works, because
Got to make it make sense.
Yeah. I love that line, I emerged. I think that's a really beautiful way of saying it. Because that is what happens. There's this, yeah, we change. Yeah, we recover parts of ourselves, but on a different level, it's something new that is still made up of me.
Mm-hmm.
It's still me shaped in some way, but it's a much sturdier, beautiful thing.
I wonder if I could ask you a question. I wonder, what was it about that process? Like, what did you discover about yourself that surprised you?
Well, I think that the primary revelation I already sort of hit on, and the rest of the steps helped me just to see it more and more clearly, was this idea of my complete focus on myself.
Mm.
Even if I thought that I was doing something for someone else, if I looked underneath closely enough, it was still me. And that's still largely the case, I think, for all of us to some degree, right? I'm not trying to pretend that I fixed that. I didn't.
But it's from a different motive, don't you think?
Yes. Actually, what I think is, I tend to believe that we have multiple motives underlying things. So I do kind things for other people. Some of that is because I just want to be kind. It's a value. It emerges naturally from me. There's all that. And I'd love you to see me that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it doesn't mean that it's not valid. It just means that, it's mixed. It's mixed. But so I think that was a big one for me, was just seeing all the ways. Because if you'd asked me, are you selfish? I would have said, no, of course not. Now, I clearly was. I mean, I guess if you'd asked me at that time, I probably would have said yes. But that was a real light for me. And then I think as we got into working, as I got into really doing the fourth step, I saw that I'm not a resentment-based alcoholic primarily. Mm-hmm. I'm a fear-based alcoholic. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's sort of, you do a resentment inventory and you do a fear inventory. Yeah. At that time, I didn't see that I had resentments. Now, with years later, things become a little bit clearer and I'm able to see things I didn't. But what I did identify with was I was scared of everything.
Yeah.
I didn't believe I could be anything good or useful or, that was all gone. And, you quote the line in the book somewhere. It's like, what is it? We're egomaniacs with an inferiority complex. That pretty much described it. I think it just showed me all the subtle ways that I was always trying to arrange life to be the way I wanted it.
Yeah.
And I think that's natural. Like you said earlier, these are natural instincts. That is a natural instinct, and it's a useful instinct a whole lot of the time. And instincts can, I think this is the actual line from the book, can run amok, and mine had. And I loved what you said about the fourth step too, because it's amazing to me. I can see it. I could see it so much more clearly now, but it still amazes me or it doesn't amaze me. I see the vulnerability in people, and they're terrified of writing that stuff down and sharing it with someone else. Now, after you've done a couple of fifth steps, your ability to be shocked by anything is largely gone. I mean, I would say to people, there's like nothing that you're going to say. Like, there's nothing that you could possibly say, I don't think, that is going to make me, judge you harshly. But it is, until you've done that a few times, now it's easy. I mean, I can, if somebody I know, I relatively easily can be like, well, I'm like this, I'm like that, I felt this, I felt that. But boy, those first few times, it's so hard, but life-changing.
Yeah, it's like that. The treasure you seek is in the work that you're avoiding.
Yeah, I heard somebody say the other day, the answers you seek are on the other side of the actions that you're avoiding. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think there's that or the treasure you seek is in the cave you fear to enter. But it's like the thing that we're most afraid of holds the most power of transformation for us.
One last thing I want to cover here is this idea that AA is a cult. So just kind of, help us reinterpret or see that differently.
I mean, it is a little culty, but if it is if it is a cult, it's the worst cult because people don't do what they're supposed to do anyway.
Yeah. Well, you said something in the book that I think is really important to this. You said that one of the things about a cult is that there is one person who has authority and everybody has to, and AA is a completely decentralized thing. No one has authority. It's a bizarre organizational system, but no one has authority.
Yeah. What we're really bumping up against is recovery resistance, right? We will look for reasons not to do this thing.
Yes.
Right. We will look for all kinds of reasons not to do this because it's so confrontational to our very identity, which I want to tie back to the default mode network, right? Like drinking was such a part of my identity. It was really difficult for me to think of not doing it. And, so the idea that AA is a cult, like that is something that the brain can latch onto and point out very valid reasons why it might be a cult. right?
Right.
It's
Right.
like and again, like you were talking about earlier, this is sort of a people-based problem, right? So, we started this conversation by saying that the people are not the program, the 12 steps are the program. I always take people back to literature. Don't, rely on what I say or you say, go back to literature. But this idea that 12 step is a cult largely is centered around how people behave. And there aren't, listen, 12 step is not the hotbed of mental health. I'll just admit that right up front.
As I used to hear people describe it, it's like you gathered all the sickest people in like one place.
Yeah, yeah. But this sort of brings
It's
me
not
to
true,
this.
but anyway.
Yeah, yeah. But it sort of leads me to this idea that, the people that offend you at meetings or put you off or whatever, they're triggering something inside that actually needs to be healed. So I would encourage people to notice when they feel angry about something, like if someone's coming off as culty or controlling or whatever, to work that feeling and that thought process through the steps to find out what's going on underneath. And I liken the meetings to this example that Marianne Williamson shared. She used to lecture a lot on the Course in Miracles, and she talked about a gemologist will take two raw, rough amethysts and put them in a tumbler together. And as these amethysts bump up against each other, they rub off their rough edges. And when they come out, they're smooth. It's almost as if we go to meetings and we tumble around with all these people. We hear all kinds of ideas that challenge us. And if we can stay the course, stay with the feeling, stay with the thing that pissed you off. They say that the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. I'm saying lean into that. Don't leave the program because somebody made you angry. I'm saying don't waste a good crisis. Use that as a way to examine what is going on underneath, because that is where anytime we get triggered or angered, that is a sign or a place that is covering a wound. And so we need to sort of bring that to the light and process our feelings to resolution so that we no longer carry them. So yeah, people at meetings can be problematic, but I'm saying with a few simple boundaries and with a little bit of courage and persistence, that even those people have something to teach us and to help us heal ultimately.
Yep, that's a beautiful place for us to wrap up. You and I are going to continue in the post-show conversation. I'd like to talk a little bit more about finding the right meeting, because this is really important. I'd like to talk about the how mindset and how important that is to recovery, and wherever else we happen to wander. But listeners, if you'd like access to the post-show conversation, all the other post-show conversations, an episode I do each week about a teaching, a song, and a quote or a poem that I love, and if you want to support us, because we can really use the support, oneyoufeed.net/join is the way to do that. Arlina, thank you so much. This was really, I really enjoyed the book, and this was a wonderful conversation. And, I would just end by saying anybody out there who's struggling with, your substance use and you're thinking about 12 steps, this book is a great, great guide to help you as you enter that world, or to get you into that world if you're having trouble getting into it.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
If what you just heard was helpful to you, please consider making a monthly donation to support the One You Feed podcast. When you join our membership community with this monthly pledge, you get lots of exclusive members-only benefits. It's our way of saying thank you for your support. Now, we are so grateful for the members of our community. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without their support, and we don't take a single dollar for granted. To learn more, make a donation at any level, and become a member of the One You Feed community, go to oneyoufeed.net/join. The One You Feed podcast would like to sincerely thank our sponsors for supporting the show.